everyone, and welcome back to another episode of On The Grid Podcast, Season 5, Episode 17. In this episode, we'll be looking back at the Imola Grand Prix, which happened last weekend. We'll be looking over the junior formulas, the Formula 2, the Formula 3. They were racing also in Imola. And we will be looking ahead to the Monaco Grand Prix, which is this weekend. I am your host, Adrian, as ever, joined by my co-host, Ethan Evans. Ethan, you're in the co-host seat today. You've had 2 stints at the host seat. Now I'm back in it, and I feel kind of comfortable. Anyway, I digress. What did you make of the Imola Grand Prix? What did you make of the overall weekend? I think qualifying played a major factor. It was similar to, the Monaco Grand Prix. It felt like, qualifying would be a large factor in the race, but the race did provide a nice and a welcome spectacle for all.
Do you know what? I was actually pleasantly surprised because, like you said, you think at somewhere like Imola, it might be down to qualifying that dictates the result. However, I think that there was a lot of good action in the race, and the race was a lot better than expected. I don't think it was the best race still. I think, Bahrain was a much better race this season, but the race itself was very, very good.
I mean, I'm not going to beat around the bush. I did not catch most of this weekend. I think I caught the race on Sunday. I was at work throughout the whole weekend. So I caught Friday's practice. I think FP1, I think I caught. And then, or FP1 and FP2, I think I caught. And then throughout the whole weekend, I was skimming, scamming. But for the race, I watched the majority of the race, and I think it was very enjoyable with the different tyre strategies, especially with the Ferraris coming through the field. But we'll talk about the Ferraris a little bit later on. Let's begin with qualifying. In Q1, the top 3 was Max Verstappen, followed by Oscar Piastri and Fernando Alonso. We'll talk about Fernando Alonso when it comes to Q3, because I think everybody was pleasantly surprised with the Aston Martin's qualifying pace. The bottom 5 consisted of Liam Lawson, Nico Hulkenberg, Esteban Ocon, Ollie Bearman, and Yuki Tsunoda. Let's begin regarding the 2 crashes that happened in Q1, Yuki Tsunoda and Franco Colapinto. Franco Colapinto obviously qualified for Q2, whereas Yuki Tsunoda did not. Heading into, it was pretty much going into the Villeneuve chicane. Yuki Tsunoda caught a little bit of too much curb, which saw his car go into the barrier. And we saw the halo in action once again, because most importantly, not a lot of people thought, well, on the initial broadcast, I believe it was Anthony Davidson and Harry Benjamin that were doing qualifying and the whole weekend instead of David Croft and Martin Brundle. They didn't actually see that Yuki Tsunoda was caught in the barrier and the kind of the wall that was ahead of the crowd. They didn't actually recognize that at first, but Yuki Tsunoda did go fully straight into it, and the halo was in action once again. But again, Yuki Tsunoda, another disappointing sort of weekend. I wouldn't say weekend, another disappointing qualifying, and he's just the qualifyings are just not there for Yuki Tsunoda, it seems.
I would say it was a disappointing weekend. He's kind of put himself on the back foot. I think he's probably lucky that he's actually been able to take part in the race. With the amount of damage on that Red Bull, it was a massive, massive crash to flip like it did. It kind of just skidded off the surface, didn't it? Bounced up, and then he was a complete passenger. So very lucky to walk away with that. As seemingly nonchalant as he did, it didn't seem to really affect him at all. He just got up and walked away. But yeah, he put himself on the back foot with it, and it's qualifying that's caused a bit of an issue. That seems to be a bit of a recurring theme in the second Red Bull seat. Yeah, you got to think he's got to be pushing on the door for Q3 week in, week out, and yeah, disappointing. He managed to recover in the race, but like I said, what would have been on offer had he qualified where he should have?
And then the next crash that happened at the back end of Q1 after obviously Yuki Tsunoda's kerfuffle got tidied up, it was Franco Colapinto, his first weekend back in an F1 seat. And obviously the expectations are very high for Franco to perform very well. By all means, he qualified through to Q2, because of a certain, obviously, red flag that he brought out with his crash heading out of the Tamburello chicane. What did you make of Franco Colapinto? Obviously, it's can you class it as a rookie error, especially with him doing the amount of races that he's done at the back end of last season? Can you is it a fine line between rookie error and just, a little bit of impatience on the power and just completely losing it?
No, I think I will give him the benefit of the doubt this time, just because he's only done about six or seven, what is it, 7 or 8 races in Formula One last season. So he's already not got the most experience, and then he's been chucked in a car he's never driven before, not done any testing in it whatsoever, just chucked in at the deep end. So if you take that crash out of the equation, he's had a fairly solid weekend. Obviously, it's going to take him some time to get to grips with the car, but he's coming at the deep end, and I think he's done well. It's just that crash is going to be a bit of a mark against his name.
And obviously, Ollie Behrman was the unfortunate in this situation because he set a very good lap to get himself through to Q2. But unfortunately, the red flag came out 3 seconds after he actually crossed the start finish line. And it was the case, Ollie Behrman didn't get a red dash, obviously red dash on his dashboard, on his steering wheel, which indicates, the fine margins that we see in Formula One. Because on the side of the tracks, the red flags were waving, but on his dash, he didn't get a red flag. And Haas obviously went up to the FIA to see the situation, and it did not get overturned. So Franco Colapinto went through to Q2. Meanwhile, Ollie Behrman qualified in 19th. But it does show that sometimes the FIA do have a fine edge and do respond to situations quickly. We've seen in the past the kerfuffle with track limit deletions and stuff like that, but in this situation they were spot on, and unfortunately Ollie Behrman didn't proceed to Q2 because of it.
Do you know, I've watched this several times. I still don't know how this lap time is not counted. I really don't understand. I think it must be because there was another red flag, a rogue red flag at some other part of the track. But that is just absolutely ridiculous. Because if you look at the slow motion replay, he crosses the line and then the red flag starts showing. So I've watched it several times. I still don't understand how he's actually not been allowed to progress through. And I think it was Gabriel Bortoleto, who was 15th, who progressed instead. Got very, very lucky, because I just can't understand. And it's had a big effect on Behrman as well, because he was starting 19th. You think at worst, if he qualified, he would be 14th, because Colapinto didn't take part in Q2. So that's 5 places. That's a big gap at a track like Imola where it's difficult to overtake. So the knock-on effect it's had over the weekend is been massive, and I think it's been very unjustified.
Yeah, it's unfortunately the unfortunate case of the FIA sort of doing their job, and then putting out a statement saying that 3 seconds prior to Ollie Behrman crossing the line, the red flags were waving, but he didn't get any notification. So, fine margins, unfortunately, for Ollie Behrman. On to Q2. The top three consisted of Carlos Sainz, who set a blistering lap time of a 1:15.198, which is only two hundredths slower than Verstappen's Q1 time. Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris followed the Williams driver in second and third. But the bottom five, three massive shocks. Leclerc in 11th, Hamilton in 12th, Antonelli in 13th. Bortoleto obviously qualified through to Q2, which is a major boost for him in 14th, and then Colapinto in 15th. But those three there, Leclerc, Hamilton, Antonelli, all three of them, when it came to Q2, when it came to the lap that mattered, put in awful lap times and saw themselves drop slowly and slowly behind the likes of Gasly, Hadjar, Stroll, Albon, Sainz. All a lot of them put very quick lap times. But unfortunately, the three drivers who were egged on by the Tifosi, Antonelli obviously being from Bologna, from Italy, and the two Ferrari drivers in the Scuderia outfit being an Italian team. But all three of them, when it mattered, absolutely bottled it.
Yeah, and funnily enough, it's actually Aston Martin that cost Ferrari Q3 appearances because they obviously went out at the end on the mediums and it worked a treat for them. They've done the same in Q3 as well, and it really worked for them. But it was the two Ferrari boys that got knocked out as a result. So very disappointing. I think it couldn't have been worse if you're an Italian, really. So you got your two Ferrari drivers and then the home driver, the home favourite as well, knocked out 11th, 12th, and 13th. But yeah, very disappointed there. I think it got better on the Sunday, but yeah, the Saturday was very disappointing from that perspective.
I mean, we were going back and forth. We were having a little ding dong between each other, and it was quite entertaining because I actually had a conversation with one of my work colleagues, and we were talking about how atrocious the qualifying pace was for Ferrari, but the race pace when it came to FP2 was a lot better. And we'll talk about the race pace when we do our average driver ratings, but it turned out to be actually a decent weekend for Ferrari. Let's move on to Q3. And it's another Oscar Piastri pole position ahead of Max Verstappen and George Russell. Oscar just seems to be unbeatable when it comes to qualifying. He just seems to pull a lap time out of nowhere, sticks it on the front row, and he just sort of goes, McLaren, Zach Brown, there you go. I'm world title. I'm a world title contender. Just label that. Lando Norris, nowhere to be seen. Oscar Piastri, can he get it in the limelight? Because when it comes to qualifying, that boy just turns it on.
Yeah, it was a very impressive performance from Piastri. An unbelievable lap. I think it's third pole position this season. Yeah, very impressive from him. I think he really set down a marker. We'll get onto the race later on, but the Saturday was perfect for him, especially with Lando Norris not in the top three as well. He set a bit of a statement with that lap time. Yeah, it was very, very good qualifying from Oscar Piastri this year, is what you've got to say.
Now, obviously, we can talk about the usual culprits in Verstappen in second, George Russell in third. He qualified very well. Lando Norris in fourth. But let's talk about the two Aston Martins. I alluded to them in Q1, and let's actually delve into what they did in Q3 because Fernando Alonso qualified fifth. And you're thinking, okay, that's good, that's fair enough. It's a two-time world champion in an Aston Martin car that's bought upgrades. But then you look three places down and you see Lance Stroll in Q3 in eighth, and you're thinking, what's gone on here? Have the upgrades somehow thrusted Aston Martin up the pecking order a little bit? But when it came to the race, it turned out completely different. But their qualifying pace, because of their upgrades, they just seemed like they were on a mission to achieve something that we've never seen before, you know?
Yeah, it's like I said, they just seem to have an insane amount of pace this weekend. And putting the mediums on for them in Q2 really actually helped them. You saw George Russell do it in Q3 as well, and it benefited him. So I know they went a step softer this year. So the medium tire this year was last year's soft. So maybe they had it in a better operating window, whereas the C6 was overheating slightly and losing a little bit of performance towards the end of the lap. But it worked a treat for them, fifth and eighth, and they were unlucky not to get points in the race.
Let's talk about another team that had two drivers through in Q3, Williams. Are they on a roll or something? Sainz in sixth, Albon in seventh. You're thinking, hold on, what on earth has James Vowles fed Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon? Because they seem to me that they are also another team that can challenge near the very top. And whether they can, get himself into the top five and like on the podium at some point this season, there could be a large possibility of that happening because the team just seem to be going on an upward trajectory, and with their qualifying performances and their race performances, it seems like the only way is up for Williams at the moment, and they're not looking down and behind their shoulder. It seems to me that Williams are finding their feet and a little bit of form, unfortunately, finally, should I say?
Yeah, they've been really impressive this season, haven't they? That's a consecutive sixth and seventh place qualifications for them. Science leading Albon again. And I don't know what they've done with this year's car, but it is an absolute monster. It seems like it's it's definitely the best of the rest. That's saying that you include Ferrari in the best. But yeah, the two drivers as well. Alex Albon's really stepped up. Carlos Sainz is now finding his feet as well. We got unlucky this weekend, but he's starting to get used to that team as well. So it's all looking good for them. We said at the start of the season they'll do really well this season. They got one of the best driver pairings on the grid, and it's shown.
So to round out quality, to round out Q3, the top 10 looked like this. It was Oscar Piastri leading the way ahead of Max Verstappen, with George Russell and Lando Norris making it an all-British second row. Fernando Alonso and Carlos Sainz made it an all-Spanish third row in fifth and sixth. Alex Albon and Lance Stroll lined up on row four in seventh and eighth, and Isaac Hadjar, another impressive qualifying, led Pierre Gasly, who was ninth and 10th for them. Let's move on to our average driver ratings, beginning with the man, the myth, the legend by the seams of things, Max Verstappen. Another victory at Imola, qualified second, finished first, made that first corner overtake on Oscar Piastri. And without a doubt, he raced into the distance, earning himself a 10 out of 10. It's as straightforward as that. He was, at one point, he was 15 seconds clear of Oscar Piastri. And the thing is, he just seemed unstoppable. Ever since he took the race lead off Oscar Piastri, you knew that Max Verstappen would win the race. So for me, 10 out of 10.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's definitely a 10 out of 10 for me. I think that he's done brilliantly. That opening move was unbelievable. It was basically an all or nothing type move. And he's benefited massively. We'll get on to Oscar Piastri a little bit later, but I think that he could do a little bit more, especially knowing that it's Max Verstappen there. But yeah, and then once he took the lead as well, it never looked in doubt. He pulled away from Piastri, so you got to think maybe the Red Bull looked to be the fastest car this weekend, regardless of that position. But he's kept himself in the championship fight, another 25 points. He's gained 7 on Norris, 10 on Piastri. So, if he keeps getting results like this and maximising his performances, then there's no reason he can't compete.
On to Lando Norris, who qualified fourth and finished second, gaining 2 places. Obviously, I think it was from fourth for Lando Norris, it was a bit of a recovery drive, and the strategy that he was on favoured him, which obviously saw him on younger tyres at the end after the safety car restart, and he overtook Oscar Piastri. I've given Lando Norris a 9 out of 10. Maybe seen as a little bit high, but I think that he maximised the best of the bad situation that he found himself in. I think he qualified out of position, especially with George Russell and Max Verstappen in front of him. But he made his way up to second and finished on the podium once again. And he was, in terms of the whole weekend as a whole, when you look at the race, it can be seen as he actually did better than his teammate. I think they sort of had it on par when it came to the whole weekend as a whole. But I've edged it just a little bit in Lando Norris's favour because he finished ahead of Oscar Piastri. So I've given him a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, no, I do agree. I think it was a good performance. He obviously was behind Russell at the start, so it's frustrated him slightly. So he lost a bit of ground there. But when he got past Russell, he looked very quick. Benefited by staying out, when half the front runners pit quite early on for the hard tyres. He stayed out. And in the clean air was able to run quite well. He just couldn't make any inroads into Max Verstappen's advantage. And I think Verstappen won by a good 7-8 seconds over him. So slightly frustrating for him. He obviously done that second pit stop towards the end as well, which gave him the fresh tyres at the end.
Like we said, let's move on to Oscar Piastri, who started on pole position but finished in third. I've actually given him an 8 out of 10. And it can be seen as, a little bit unjust, but if I've given Lando Norris a 9 out of 10, I think automatically you bump one lower for Oscar Piastri. I don't think the race didn't unfold the way Oscar Piastri would have wanted. I think if he was to keep the lead into turn one, I think he would have been able to pull away from Max Verstappen. I think Max would have put him under a little bit of pressure, but I think the McLaren would have been able to hold him off. But But that's if buts and maybes and not absolutes. It's not concrete. And what happened was Oscar Piastri finished on the bottom step of the podium and not the top step. So it's a weekend of missed opportunities for Oscar Piastri because he definitely could have made further inroads in his lead in the drivers' standings, but unfortunately he's lost ground on both his teammate and Max Verstappen. So it's he's still gained a podium finish and a good amount of points, but unfortunately it's I think a weekend of missed opportunities for Oscar Piastri. So I've settled with an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, no, I do agree. It wasn't his best performance. I think, like I said, for Norris, he gained by staying out. Piastri lost by coming in. He lost ground with the cars that he had to overtake again, sort of like your Hadjars, your Hamiltons, those sorts of drivers, where he had to make his way back through the field. And by that point, he'd actually lost a lot of the pace in the tyres. So it did almost seem like, because there was a bit of a chain going on, that once the drivers were in clean air, those medium tyres came alive and they started working really well. Whereas they struggled at the start because they were basically running nose to tail. And I think Piastri picked to cover off a few other drivers, and it ended up being the wrong decision for him and for the team. So an 8 out of 10. He's still on the podium, and it was a poor weekend, probably his poorest since the opening race in Australia.
From a man of missed opportunities to a man that was certainly on a mission, Sir Lewis Hamilton qualified 12th, finished fourth, making up 8 places, the second most of anyone on the grid behind Yuki Tsunoda, who made up 10. He started in the pit lane and qualified 20th, of course. 10 out of 10. Not much more I can say about Lewis Hamilton because I feel that the weekend was salvaged by the amount of moves that he made. He seemed like, especially in the last 10 or 15 laps, I think he made 3 or 4 moves that got himself inside the top four, inside the top five, sorry. And then he made that move on Albon to get himself up to four. Well, he made that move on Leclerc actually to get himself up to fourth, and Leclerc had to give the position back to Albon, which obviously dropped the Monegasque into sixth and Albon into fifth. I think Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc were two men on a mission. Completely different look to them when it came to race day. I've given Hamilton a 10 out of 10. I think it's a drive worthy of a 10 out of 10. You may disagree with me, but I think that he was a man on a mission. And I'm talking highly about Lewis Hamilton. It's not usually me, but I think the drive at Imola was tremendous. It was fantastic, and arguably, um, bar his obviously sprint race, victories and podiums, barring that, I think probably arguably his best race of the season so far.
Well, at least I can't be accused of being biased. I've only gone for a 9 out of 10 for Lewis Hamilton, so only one lower. It was a very, very good performance, but I can't give him a 10 because he's qualified 12th, he's not even on the podium. So I do think, given an extra couple of laps, or if he didn't take so long to clear Albon and Leclerc, he probably would have been on the podium, because the gap went from about 4 seconds to just over 1 second in 3 laps or so to Piastri. Piastri was obviously on the old tyres as well. I do think he would have got a podium if he was given an extra couple of laps, or if there wasn't so long behind the safety car.
On to another driver who had a fantastic weekend. I seem to have a nick of giving out 10 out of 10s because for this driver, I've also given us a 10 out of 10. It's Alex Albon. He qualified seventh, finished in fifth, inside the top five. His best ever start to an F1 season, and he's not in a Red Bull team. He's in a in loose quotation marks a lesser Williams team. But the Williams do seem to have a race car that can provide their two drivers a top five finish, and it showed once again. It's another top five finish for Alex Albon. He's fended off Leclerc. Obviously, they had a bit of a battle. He's finished ahead of Russell. He's finished ahead of his teammate. For me, I think another driver who had a very good weekend, almost the perfect weekend. He finished inside the top five, and he had like I said, a very fantastic weekend for his standards. A fantastic start to the season for Alex Albon, and he scoops a 10 out of 10 from me.
Yeah, agreed. I think this guy's been one of the top three drivers this season. comfortably. So it's a 10 out of 10 from me as well. I think he's very, very unlucky not to be sat on the podium himself because he was just shoved off the track from Leclerc. I know he got the position back, but he lost the place to Hamilton after that. So it could have been a fourth because you could say they were both on the new hards. So who could say if he would have been able to overtake Albon? But I think that fifth place is still an excellent result. The fact that we're sat there with him finishing fifth and thinking it could have been more just goes to show the improvement from Williams this season.
On to P6 Mansell Leclerc, qualified 11th and finished in 6th. I've obviously gone with the usual rule of if a teammate finishes ahead of you, you get one grade lower. And you've probably done the same. You've probably given Leclerc an 8. I've settled with a 9. Both of the Ferrari drivers had a fantastic weekend, and I think it's undermined because of their poor qualifying performance. And if they qualified inside the top 10, it could have been a whole lot different. But I still think their Sunday recovery drives was what made the weekend. I think most Ferrari fans will look past the fact that they qualified outside the top 10 and still made it into the points and got themselves a decent amount of points. So I've given Leclerc a 9 out of 10. I will obviously agree with you when you give him an 8 out of 10 because you gave Hamilton a 9, but that's part of the parcel. It happens, and it's what we've done on this podcast. So if you give the teammate that finished higher a decent grade of a 9, you're obviously going to give him an 8. So that's what I've settled with for Leclerc, a 10 for Hamilton and a 9 for Leclerc.
Yeah, I have gone for an 8 out of 10. I was a little bit I'm in an RM between a 7 and an 8 just because of that move on Albon, which cost him fifth place, cost him an extra position. But I do think that it was a very, very good drive. He was the one that sort of triggered the pit stops at the start. He obviously wasn't working for him. And then Pitt and some of the moves he was making was brilliant. He undercut Sainz and Russell and I think a couple of others as well. And then he just got unlucky with the timing of the VSC and the safety car. But it was a good performance. I couldn't give him any higher than that, obviously, because I only gave Hamilton a 9. But I thought it was an 8 out of 10 performance from him.
On to George Russell, who qualified in third and then finished in seventh. A poor weekend from George Russell's standards, but I don't think his car was capable of pushing anywhere further than that. I think that the Mercedes looked hooked when it came to qualifying, but when it came to the race, it just completely fell apart, especially with Kimi Antonelli retiring due to car issues, and then George Russell just was having issues of his own. He was reporting on the radio quite often that he was having issues. So for him finishing seventh, I'd like to give him a 7. I think that, a seventh man, 7 sounds poetic, and I'm sticking with him. It wasn't a vintage George Russell weekend. Qualified fantastically. In the race, it just completely fell away from him.
Yeah, I've gone for a 7 as well. I think it was he suffered with I don't know where the pace went for Mercedes because obviously he done brilliantly in qualifying, but then it just fell away in the race. And the fact he's still finished seventh is a good result. Considering he lost out at the early pit stops when Leclerc pit early, he got undercut, he struggled to make his way back through. I think there was a lot of overheating in the rear tyres, which cost him a bunch of time. So I think all in all, you've got to take that. And the fact is, this is the first competitive session that Russell's finished outside the top 5 this season. So you take all of the qualifying sprint races. This is the first one he's finished outside the top 5. So you've got to hold your hands up to him and say that that's an impressive stat. So it's a 7 out of 10 from me. It just wasn't his day.
On to Carlos Sainz, who finished in 8th after qualifying 6th. I was initially going to give him an 8 out of 10, but I've revised it to a 9 because I think that the two Williams kind of were in a league of their own. I've gave Al I don't know actually because Albon finished 3 places in front of him, and Carlos Sainz started in front of Albon. You know what? I'm rolling with a 9 out of 10. I think for the two Williams drivers, I think they're like I mentioned, they're looking on form, and they're kind of Carlos Sainz is finally looking like he's at one with the car. Unfortunately, in the race, Alex Albon did have the superior race pace, and it showed with Carlos Sainz finishing in 8th. But I still think the Williams team will gladly take the points haul that they got from the two drivers, and they'll go into Monaco full of optimism, and hopefully that they can replicate what happened in Imola in Monaco with a very good qualifying performance and a very good race finish. So I've gone with a 9 out of 10. Could be an 8, but I'm settling with a 9. I'm sticking with my guns.
I have gone for an 8 out of 10 for Carlos Sainz. Again, it was a good performance, but he's one of those who has been slightly done in by the VSC and the timing of it. Hitting early, losing the position to Leclerc, like I said, and then trying to make his way back through the field. I think he came on the radio and said, "Look, I think we've done the wrong strategy here." But again, he's finished eighth place, which rewind the clock 12 months ago, finished eighth in a Williams, that would have been probably a 9 or a 10. So it's all about the perspective. He's had a good season to this point, and it just didn't work out for him. Another day, the VSC doesn't come out, and maybe he makes his way back through the field, and he might finish ahead of Albon. You don't know, but an 8 out of 10 is still a good performance.
On to Isaac Hadjar, who qualified in ninth, finished in ninth. And you know how I mentioned about George Russell finishing seventh and getting a 7 out of 10? It seems even more poetic from a guy who qualified in ninth and finished in ninth to give him a 9 out of 10, because you look at him in comparison to Liam Lawson, who finished 14th and could only qualify in 16th and couldn't even get out of Q1. You're thinking, what is Lauren Mekies feeding young Isaac? What is he feeding him? Because it's another points finish, more points for the sister Red Bull team, and he just seems light and day superior over his more experienced teammate in loose quotation marks in Liam Lawson. Isaac Hadjar, like I said in our previous videos ahead of the season, he would be an underdog from other rookies. You look at your Antonellis, your Behrman, who was in the spotlight. Um, he would be the one that would be downplayed, and he was the last one to be announced from the rookies, and he's certainly showing that he is a man that is worth of an F1 seat, and once again finishing number points, putting on a fantastic display in Imola.
I think there's a very strong argument that he's actually been the best rookie this season, because I've just had a look at the results. Liam Lawson hasn't beaten him in any race this season. Yuki Tsunoda's only beaten him twice this season, in the 7 races, and one of which came when he was in the Red Bull. So even still, he's beaten Yuki Tsunoda 5-2 in race results, and Liam Lawson 7-0. He's been utterly brilliant. I've gone for a 9 out of 10 as well. He is so impressive. However, I think the best course of action for him is to stay in this team for at least the remainder of this season, possibly next season as well, and then look to a different team. Look to somewhat a midfield car where he's actually going to have the potential to show his ability and then get a top seat, because we've seen the Red Bull seat is an absolute graveyard for drivers. So the best course of action he can take is to use this stepping stone, get a midfield seat somewhere else, and then use that to get a top seat. If he continues on the same trajectory, but he's been brilliant. Like I said, another points finish. And he looked really impressive. He made those mediums stretch out very far. And I think he was on the similar pace to Hamilton come the end of the stint. And Hamilton was on the hard tyres when that was at a stage when the hards should have been faster. So mightily impressive from him, and a 9 out of 10 very comfortably.
And to our final points finisher in Yuki Tsunoda, who qualified in 20th after his Q1 crash, actually started from the pit lane and managed to finish inside the points, making up 10 places in the process. I've gone with a 7 out of 10. I think it's a similar recovery drive to what the two Ferraris had. He's able to finish inside the top 10, getting himself 1 point. I mean, 1 point is a measly 1 point, but still, he was able to you know, make all those moves, get himself into the points, and finally show Red Bull higher ups that he is able to finish it inside the points. You know, even though he had a massive, massive crash. But I've gone with a 7 out of 10 for Yuki Tsunoda's recovery drive. A very good drive. Just you know, it's a lot of missed opportunities, especially if he qualified into Q3.
Yeah, I've gone for a 6 out of 10. It was a very, very good drive in the race, but there's a reason that he's had to put in a drive of that caliber. It's because he's crashed out, and he would have been starting at around 10th place had he not crashed and had he had a clean qualifying. So you can argue that he's made up so many positions, but he made up positions because he put himself in the position where he had to. So it's a 6 out of 10 for me.
On to our first driver outside the points. It is Fernando Alonso, who qualified in P5 and finished in 11th. Unfortunately, Aston Martin's race pace was nowhere to be seen. It was just in the bin. It was what we remember Aston Martin to be like for the start of this for this season so far, should I say? Just nowhere to be seen. And it's another race that Fernando Alonso has gone without a points finish. I think the last points finish was Abu Dhabi last season, and the races just keep on ticking down. And Fernando Alonso is being carried by Lance Stroll's point tally. And could we point out we have an agenda against Lance Stroll on this podcast? We'd like to have a good moan about Lance Stroll, but Aston Martin's points have solely come from Lance Stroll this season. I would have never thought that would come out my mouth, but yes, that did in fact come out my mouth. For the weekend as a whole, I think Fernando enjoyed a good spell. He obviously, unfortunately, got overtaken by Yuki Tsunoda for the final points place. But I've still given him a 7 out of 10. I still think that it's a very, very good performance. It's just unfortunately for him and for Aston Martin, their car was nowhere to be seen in the race. Their car was solely um, built and kind of strategized for qualifying. But you know, it is what it is. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to get into the points. Unfortunately, he's still getting carried by Lance Stroll, and unfortunately, the points duck continues. 7 out of 10 from me.
7 out of 10 as well from me. It was very, very impressive qualifying performance, and the early pace looked really good. Aston Martin made a mistake with pitting their cars so early on, especially both of them. You look at Williams, they split the strategy. Ferrari as well split the strategy. Aston Martin decided, you know what, we're not going to do that. We're going to put all our eggs in one basket and then hope a VSC doesn't come out. And guess what? A VSC did come out and they got screwed over. They both pit for hards very early on, starting on the mediums, of course. They needed to keep one of them out, and I think they paid a price for that. Still, Alonso was fighting right to the end for the last 2 points positions. I think he was ahead of Tsunoda for a while, but he got nipped at the end, nipped in the last few laps and couldn't reclaim the position. But I do think he was only like 0.3 of a second off 10th place in the end, off of Tsunoda. So a good performance. And, you know, I know we say that Stroll's got all the points for Aston Martins. I do think Alonso's shown he's still been better than Stroll. He's just been a bit more unlucky. And I think that's evident here. So that's why I've given him a 7 out of 10.
On to Nico Hulkenberg, who qualified in 17th and finished in 12th. I think it was a decent performance from Nico Hulkenberg, even though he's got another embarrassing mark to his name that Bortoleto out-qualified him once again. But apart from that, I think his pace was very good. Sauber looks decent enough. And you know, I've also settled for a 7 for Nico Hulkenberg. I think you could see it as a little bit high. You could see it as a little bit low, especially with how Sauber have been this season and last season. Yeah, I've settled with a 7. I think it was a good performance. It's obviously not the standard of what we've seen in Australia, because I don't think they'll reach them heights until the last couple of races of the season if they bring upgrades. But for me, it was a decent performance, and he made his way forward very, very convincingly and finished ahead of the likes of Lance Stroll and Pierre Gasly, who got themselves in Q3 and just weren't able to capitalise on their starting positions.
So for me, I've gone for an 8 out of 10 for Nico Hulkenberg. The fact is that he's finished 12th in a Sauber. We talked last season about how bad that Sauber was. So it's only fair that we actually recognise when he puts in a good performance because again, he was one that was fighting for points. And if we're comparing, him with his teammate and where the Saubers were last season, they're absolutely nowhere. I think he was ninth before the final safety car, I want to say. And then he just dropped away at the end because I think he was left out on old tyres. But it was almost a very, very good performance from Nico Hulkenberg. I think qualifying was what let him down slightly, only managing 17th. I think he made a mistake on his final lap. He got caught out at some point. I can't remember exactly where, but that cost him a shot at Q2. But in the race, he was fantastic. Another one who benefited from the first VSC, but then lost out from the second safety car. So I've gone for an 8 out of 10 because of where he's finished compared to where that car actually is.
On to Pierre Gasly, who finished 13th after starting 10th. I've gone with a 6. Very, very Pierre Gasly-esque to qualify him in Q3 and then finish outside the points. It's the story of Pierre Gasly, I think, so far this season. He's had very, very good qualifying performances throughout the whole season. But when it came to the Sunday, he just weren't able to deliver points for the team, and he would regularly finish just outside the points. And it happened again at Imola, where he finished just outside the points. Yeah, for me, 6 out of 10. Very, very Pierre Gasly-esque so far this season from Pierre Gasly, and it was another race like that in Imola.
For me, I've gone for a 5 out of 10 for Pierre Gasly. He had a very good qualifying session, got up to ninth at the start, but then I think when he's gone off and he's battling Leclerc, I think that's a Gasly mistake because it's his corner, going up the hill, it's his corner, he's ahead. Leclerc's looking like he might go down the inside, but Gasly's just giving him way too much space. It's his corner. And he's just round wide in the end, and he's lost a bunch of positions. I think he dropped to 14th, and from there it was an uphill battle. He probably got a bit of floor damage running over the gravel like that, and that's what's cost him really. 13th place in the end, but it could have been more. And from qualifying as well, he was looking in good stead. But yeah, disappointing for him that he couldn't get any points.
On to Liam Lawson, and with most of these drivers now looking down the grid, they're all just meh performances. They're all average, especially with Liam Lawson from where we've talked about Isaac Hadjar so highly. Liam Lawson was just average. It wasn't striking anything for me. Qualified 16th, got bumped up to 15th after Colapinto's one place grid drop, I believe. And then finishing 14th is just, yeah, strikes average, 6 out of 10.
So I've gone for a 5 out of 10 from Liam Lawson. Not what can you say at this point? I think it's not good. It's not going well for him this season. It's not. He just can't seem to put some consistency together. He obviously, like we said, he had a good race a couple of races ago in Saudi, and then followed that up with DNF in Miami, and then a poor result here. When you look at how his teammates doing in Isaac Hadjar, he needs to be stepping up. There needs to come a point where he brings it all together and he has the complete package and he does, even get a point or even an 11th place, something like that. He just needs to show a bit more, really. And it's disappointing because we know it's there. We've seen it last season. We saw it the season before when he stepped in. It's just he can't seem to do it with his car. Maybe a bit of the pressure is mounting up. Like chucking him into that Red Bull seat for those first two races is looking like a worse and worse decision on the basis that it's just destroyed all of his confidence. So a 5 out of 10, it's disappointing. It's disappointing to see.
On to Lance Stroll, who had such a fantastic qualifying, getting himself into Q3 and qualifying 8th, but just fell away. Finished 15th behind Lawson, behind Gasly, behind Nico Hulkenberg. The thing is, we've had this rule, and we've shown it throughout this podcast episode and podcast episodes beforehand, where when your teammate finishes ahead of you, you get one grade lower. I've gone two grades lower from what I've given Fernando Alonso. I've given him a five. Um, just very average, just bog standard. Lance Stroll doing Lance Stroll things, not being able to, capitalize on where he started, not being able to fight as hard as his teammate did. Yeah, average five.
Yeah, no, I do agree. I think that where you saw that Alonso was fighting right to the very end for points, and Stroll just dropped like a rock. So he's finished 15th at the end. When there was pace in the car, we've seen that. I know they got done over by the strategy, but to finish 15th so far off the points is very disappointing. So I do agree with you with a 5 out of 10. I think there was, I think that it's only a matter of time until they can bring it all together and get some good points between the pair of them. But he needs to be doing a little bit more. He needs to sort of look after track position a little bit better, I think, to finish behind. I think Gasly and Lawson, especially, was the disappointing thing. And I think if he finished sort of 12th or 13th, probably would have got 6 or 7 as well. So not a good race for him.
On to Franco Colapinto next, who qualified 15th but started 16th and then finished 16th. That big crash, it's just ringing in my head, and I don't think I can give him anything higher than a 5 out of 10 because on the face of it, you look at it right. He's qualified into Q2. He's had a decent race. He's finished, etc. But that crash, it just continues the kind of talk of the town where he came in to replace Logan Sargent, but then crashed a lot more than Logan Sargent did, and he's continuing that trend for Alpine. I think that's what Flavio Briatore would have told him. Finish the race, have a good qualifying, finish the race, avoid crashes. He's had a decent enough qualifying. He's finished the race, but that middle part of that statement of those targets he didn't meet. And I think for me, that marks him down a little bit, and I'm unable to give him anything higher than a five. So I've settled with a 5 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm in two minds. I think I'm going to go for a 5 as well, actually. I had initially written down a 4, but he did put it through to Q2. The crash was what's going to knock me down because even if he could finish short of like a 13th or something, get a couple of extra positions. But yeah, his pace just wasn't there in the race, was it? He didn't look comfortable at all. Yeah, a disappointing one for Colapinto. And I think that, like we said, he just needs a bit of time to bed in. I don't think we're going to judge him too harshly at this moment in time, purely on the fact that it's his first race with the team. He's been thrown right in at the deep end, no testing, no practice, whatever, no pre-season. And yeah, there's always going to be a bit of a settling in period. So a 5 out of 10 as well.
On to our penultimate race finisher in Ollie Behrman, who qualified in 19th and finished in 17th. It's a very tough one for me because it could have been a lot different weekend for Ollie Behrman, was it, for him to get through to Q2? I think he could have been pushing, towards the reaches of the points if he was able to get it through to Q2. But unfortunately, instead, he's finished the penultimate of the race finishers. I've gone with a five, another 5 out of 10. I think I like going middle of the road. I like sitting on the fence because I think that even though he's had a poor weekend in a sense, you kind of have to look at it in two ways because he did get very hard done by the FIA, who judged him crossing the line to the red flags coming out 3 seconds in between those. Very harsh. Could have been a lot different weekend for Ollie Behrman, but unfortunately he had to settle for 17th place and scrape him a barrel of a penultimate race finisher in Imola.
Yeah, I agree. I've gone for a 5 out of 10 as well. And it's like I said, exactly like you said. If he has that lap instated at the end of Q1, he starts at worse. He starts 14th, and then there's an opportunity to go in ahead and do something. But as it is, he started 19th. It's a massive, massive difference at a track like Imola, and I don't think he was at fault at all. I'm surprised that Haas didn't fight it a little bit more. But yeah, because you watch the onboard and it looks like he's got the lap in. He's got the lap in before the red flag show. So I wouldn't be happy at all if I was Ollie Behrman, because then it kind of it writes his race before it even gets going, because he hasn't really got the tools to fight. So yeah, 5 out of 10, disappointing. But whereas last week we were saying he needs to do a little bit more in qualifying, this is purely down to this is beyond his control. This is factors outside of his control, and that's what's cost him this weekend through no fault of his own.
On to our last race finisher, it was Gabriel Bortoleto, who qualified in 14th and finished in 18th. I think if you look at it, it's a very, very good qualifying from Gabriel Bortoleto, out qualifying Nico Hulkenberg, his more experienced teammate. But then his racecraft and race pace just it's nowhere to be seen. And I think he's gradually going to start finding his feet when it comes to race pace, but Imola just wasn't it. I've settled with another 5 out of 10. I've gotten a habit of giving out 5 out of 10s in the lower reaches of the finishes, but I think for what he did in qualifying, it kind of got outdone in the race, and it just balances it out.
I've gone for a 6 out of 10, on the basis that he's qualified well, and then, like I said, the Sauber isn't a good car. It is still the weakest car on the grid. So he's outqualified Nico Hulkenberg as well. And we spoke at length about how good Nico Hulkenberg is. You know, the pace he shows and all of that. Last season he was routinely putting the Haas into Q3, and I think he had more Q3 appearances than Sergio Perez. Probably says more about Perez than Hulkenberg, but it doesn't deny the fact Hulkenberg is a very, very quick driver. So to out-qualify him is no mean feat. So that's why I've gone for a 6 out of 10.
On to our two retirees from the race. It was Kimi Antonelli and Esteban Ocon, both from faults of their, not faults, car faults, should I say. Nothing in terms of their driving and what they did. It was literally just mechanical issues. For Antonelli, I've given him a 6 out of 10. I think, up until that point, it was a decent enough race for Antonelli, but then it just, the car just gave way and just stopped working. And then Esteban Ocon, I've given him a 4. I don't think I can give him the same grade as I did Ollie Behrman. I think he qualified in front of Ollie Behrman. But then again, obviously, we don't know where he would have finished in the end, and it's very hard for me to judge anything by that. So yeah, I've gone for a 6 out of 10 for Kimi Antonelli and a 4 out of 10 for Esteban Ocon.
I've gone for a 5 for both of them. It's difficult to know when you got mechanical faults like this where exactly the fault was actually kicked in and how much time it's actually cost them before they've had to retire. So I think for Antonelli, it was costing him from quite early on. And he was saying he was just losing more and more power to the point where his engine just kicked in and wouldn't go any further. So it's difficult to say. So I've just gone straight down the middle. Antonelli didn't have a very good qualifying session. Ocon didn't either. And it should have been 19th, as we've discussed. So straight down the middle for the pair of them, because I think Ocon retired fairly early as well. I think it was around lap 20, and then Antonelli around lap 40 or so. But he was in a good position, to be fair, before their retirement.
On to looking through Formula 2 and Formula 3. Let's begin with Formula 2. The more experienced of the junior categories. So in qualifying, it was Dino Beganovic that gained pole position for the feature race ahead of Sebastian Montoya and Victor Martins. Then obviously for the sprint race, it should have been I believe it should have been Kushmini, or no, it wasn't Kushmini. Ignore me. It was Ritomo Miata who was on pole position. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to convert it into a sprint race victory. It was actually Jack Crawford that got himself the victory after starting second, with Arvid Lindblad and Luke Browning, the two rookie Brits, finishing second and third, with Martins, Alex Dunn, Miata, Fornaroli, and Stanek rounding off the points finishes. In the feature race, it was Beganovic who started on pole position, but it was Alex Dunn, the McLaren junior, who came from fifth to finish first. Luke Browning finished in second, another podium finish for him, with Dino Beganovic losing 2 places and finishing in third place. Arvid Lindblad still finished in a very respectable fourth place after starting sixth. Fornaroli lost a place and finished fifth, with Jack Crawford in sixth, Oliver Goethe in seventh, Montoya in eighth. Richard Verschoor gaining 10 places from where he started in the feature race to finish ninth, and Sami Megatunov gained 6 places from starting 16th to finish as the last points finisher in 10th. Looking at the looking at the F2 standings, it's Alex Dunn who takes the championship lead over from Richard Verschoor. He gained 29 points for the weekend, putting himself on 64 points overall. Luke Browning jumps up to second with Richard Verschoor in third, Leo Fornaroli in fourth, Lindblad in fifth, Marty in sixth, Crawford in seventh, Martans in eighth, Beganovic in ninth, and Goethe in 10th. Obviously, the points disparity between you look at arguably first to fourth is only 12 points. And all of those drivers gained a heap of points apart from Richard Verschoor. Ethan, arguably, you could say it was a very poor weekend for Richard Verschoor. He only gained 2 points from the feature race, didn't get any momentum in the sprint race, and in the feature race, like I said, only the 2 points. But then again, the rookies seem to be on it. Alex Dunn, championship leader, Luke Browning second, Fornaroli fourth, Lindblad fifth. The rookies seem to be putting the old veteran from Formula 2 on the back foot a little bit.
Yeah, it's been an interesting start to the season. I think we've had what 4 rounds now in F2, so we've got a way to go, but it's interesting to see how it's taken shape. Like you said, Alex Dunn had a good weekend this weekend, takes the lead. But yeah, we'll watch it closely over the next few race weekends. Where I think the next one is Spain, if I'm not mistaken. No. Anyway, we'll watch it closely and see how they get on. But yeah, very interesting so far.
Yeah, matter of fact, the next race weekend is in fact Monaco. They've got back-to-back weekends. So if you do keep a close eye on the junior formulas, what they do because of Monaco and the nature of the track, they run in two groups instead of one group. So there's a qualifying A and a qualifying B, and it's just the respective times that get put together. Um, On to F3. Let's continue on to F3 and then we'll jump back straight into F1 and round off the episode. So in F3, it was Rafa Camara, another fantastic performance in qualifying, got himself pole position ahead of Santiago Ramos and Noah Stramsted. In the sprint race, it was actually Tim Tramnitz who started second, got himself into first ahead of Bruno Del Pino, who finished second. And it was Nicola Tsolov who rounded off the podium, who started in fourth and finished third. It was Louis Sharp who finished in fourth, Roman Belinsky who finished in fifth, Noah Stramsted in sixth, Tuka Tappinen, Hugo Uchukwu, Noel Leon, and Alessandro Goose Street, who finished in 10th. And in the feature race, Camara could not convert his pole position into a race victory. It was Santiago Ramos who got a good start and a good launch, and he was able to clinch the victory in the feature race. Noah Stramsted got himself from third into second, with Camara dropping onto the bottom step of the podium in third. Tappinen, Boyer, Tramnitz, Gusti, Belinsky, Solov, and Lawrence van Hoopen rounded off the points finishes. In F3, even though Camara had a bit of an iffy weekend, unable to capitalise on his pole position, he's still holding on to the F3 Drivers' Championship standings lead. He's 21 points ahead of Noah Stramsted, who had a very good weekend, gaining 25 points. Tim Tramnitz, even though he finished in first in the sprint race, he drops down a place and he's currently in third, with Tappinen gaining 3 places up to fourth. Santiago Ramos, with his feature race victory, goes up 6 places into fifth. And then it's drivers drop it down the order. So Tsolov down in sixth now. Voisin losing 4 places. He's in seventh now. Stens Horner didn't gain any points, similar to Voisin. He's in eighth. Belinsky gained himself 10 points and moved up 4 places, and now he's inside the top 10 in ninth. And Teofil Neal he's in 10th. F3, F2, there's, especially with them having sprint races and feature races, there's a lot of action in the junior categories. Uh, Ethan, did you catch any of the F3? What Jamaica's Santiago Ramos gaining himself a very good points haul and getting himself inside the top 10. He was sort of a contender last season. Whether he can contend for the championship this season is yet to be seen, but it's quite a mountain to climb. But like I mentioned, there's so much action in Formula 3 and Formula 2. Anything can happen, and a major point swing in his favour could see him challenging for the title very, very soon.
Yeah, that's the thing. It only takes one weekend really because there's a lot of points up for grabs on a week by week basis. So a couple of good performances strung together, and you could gain sort of 20, 30 points in your competitors. Like we've seen, I think Voisin and Solov took an early lead in the championship, but they've now dropped away after a poor weekend here. So it just goes to show how up and down the championship can be. So it's just about having that consistency. If you look at like sort of the F2 championship last year, you had Paul Aaron, who didn't win a race until right at the end, but he was leading the championship for a long time because of his just consistency.
Let's jump back into F1. Let's review our Imola Grand Prix predictions. I'll start off with my two-star predictions. So I got one bob on, and I was delighted with it when it came through. A safety car at Imola. It arrived, and it gave me a nice little tick in the box. Unfortunately, my Haas points did not come through. I was thinking when I was watching the race, oh, I definitely wrote down RB points. I didn't. I wrote Haas points, and unfortunately, that did not happen. They had a very, very poor weekend. Ethan, how did you get on with your star predictions?
Again, up and down for me. So I had Colapinto Q2, which he did get despite the crash at the end of Q1. And then I had Hamilton to outqualify Leclerc. I think there was about a tenth and a bit in it. I think it was a tenth and a half in the end. So not to be, but it was the closest that those two have been. So it's a step in the right direction for Hamilton, closing the gap to Leclerc and qualifying.
Matter of fact, I've actually obviously seen our kind of head to head between ourselves in predictions, and obviously I was writing down and jotting down how we did this weekend. I did write down that Verstappen didn't qualify in second. I had something in my head was engraved and said Max Verstappen did not qualify second because he finished first. So I did actually put if I showed my notepad, I actually had an X to begin with, but that's changed into a tick. So I've got to change it on my Excel spreadsheet. In qualifying, I had Lando Norris and Max Verstappen to be on the front row with Piastri, Antonelli, and Russell rounding off the top five. So I got 1 out of 5 there. And in the race, I managed also 1 out of 5 with Lando Norris finishing the race in first. I had Piastri, Norris, Verstappen, Russell, and Leclerc. So 1 out of 5 in the race, 1 out of 5 in the qualifying, 1 out of 2 in the star predictions. I'm a very 1 out of something man, but I got a 3 in total for the race weekend.
And for me, I got the front row correct. So I had Piastri from Verstappen. I then had Norris, then Russell. So I got those two the wrong way round. And then I had Antonelli with fifth, and he was nowhere near. So 2 out of 5 for me in qualifying, which is a little bit disappointing considering I was got third and fourth in the wrong way round. Then for the race, I had Piastri, Norris, Antonelli, Russell, Verstappen. So I got Norris correct in P2. So I'll take 4. I think I extend my gap. So I will take that.
Yeah, you initially extend your gap by 1. I mean, I gained a little bit back in Miami, and I was very happy that I gained something back in Miami, but unfortunately, currently it looks like it's going the opposite direction once again. Let's preview Monaco. Let's do our predictions for Monaco. Ethan, why don't you give me your Monaco two-star predictions, please? He's not ready. Okay, it's fine. It's fine. I'll give my star predictions for Monaco. So for the Monaco Grand Prix, I see the home favourite in his white suit and his baby blue, kind of tint and his lovely hat to get a podium. I've got Leclerc podium. I think that the home favourite broke his duck of race victories there last time out in Monaco. And I see him having a very good race. My second start predictions, I'm still very iffy with it. And I do want to change it, but I'm not going to change it. I'm going to stick with it. I've gone for three DNFs. I think that there could be a crash of some sense, similar to what happened between Perez, Magnussen, and Hulkenberg, and what happened with Gasly and Ocon. You know, I'm hoping that happens. I'm still very unsure about it, but I'm going to stick with it. So my two-star predictions: Leclerc podium and three DNFs.
So I am now ready. I've gone for two or more drivers to pit on lap one because if you remember, the Monaco Grand Prix this year is a mandatory two stop. So I think at least two drivers are going to bite the bullet on lap one, stick on a set of tyres, then basically do the pit stop at the normal stop as well. So they're going to try and take an advantage there, probably towards the back end of the field. Maybe a Sauber and an Alpine or something like that. And my second one is for Alonso to get points. It came very, very close, obviously, in Imola. I do think he's going to get some points because if you remember the last couple of seasons, that he has driven absolutely to a next level in terms of holding everybody up. And if you look at the mini map, there'll be the drivers at the front and then Alonso and then just a train behind him. I think it happened last year when he was about 40 seconds behind the car in front, but had everybody right behind him, almost like a safety car.
Everybody aboard the Alonso train. Choo choo. Let's look ahead of qualifying and the race, and we'll round off the episode in that way. So in qualifying, I've gone for a Piastri, Verstappen, Norris top three, with Russell and Leclerc fourth and fifth. And then in the race, I see a McLaren 1-2 with Piastri leading the way ahead of Lando Norris. Obviously, like I mentioned in my start prediction, Leclerc climbing onto the podium in third, with Verstappen in fourth and Russell in fifth.
I've gone quite boring. I've gone to the same top five in qualifying and the race. So I've gone Verstappen on pole and to take the victory, and then I've gone for Piastri followed by Norris second and third, then Russell from Leclerc. So I do think that if Verstappen gets pole, he wins, just no doubt. There's no way he's being overtaken. And then I do think the McLarens will be second and third, and then Russell's been strong. And Leclerc, maybe he's broke the curse now and he can get a good result.
Let's hope that my predictions come to fruition and not your predictions, because I don't want you taking a further lead. Currently, you're 10 points ahead of me in predictions. So I'm hoping that I can claw back something ahead of obviously the races to come. But that's the end of episode 17 of OnTheGrid Podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the podcast where we've reviewed the Imola Grand Prix and we've previewed the Monaco Grand Prix. We'll be back next week as we look back at the Monaco Grand Prix, give out our driver ratings, and we do a whole lot more ahead of the Spanish Grand Prix in the second triple header of the season. We'll be back next week, like I said. Thank you for listening. See you next time. Goodbye.